Hello, I'm Victor Malarek. Imagine that you've been transported to another world. It looks exactly like this Earth, but with a few crucial differences. Everything seems more intense for one thing. Noise is louder, colors brighter, every sensation overwhelming. And then there's the problem with other people. You understand their language perfectly, but you can't decode what they're saying. And you can't read their facial expressions. You're lost, drowning in emotions and confusion. And if you can imagine all that, then you have an inkling about what it's like to have a disability called Asperger's syndrome. And like the Canadians who must live with it, be a stranger in a familiar land.
You're in a mall on a Saturday afternoon. The crowds and the noise are annoying. That's just part of the shopping experience. But if you've got Asperger's syndrome, you get totally disoriented. The sounds, colors, and crowds become so overwhelming, they're painful. You panic and you go into a state of shock.
My left side of the face would go numb, then my arm, then my left leg, then my tongue, and then I'd lose the ability to talk.
You start a new job, you hope you'll fit in, but you have Asperger's syndrome, and at your first meeting, your anxiety level shoots way up. You can't understand what's going on. Too many thoughts, too much chatter become an unbearable noise inside your head, and there's no switch to turn it off.
With just like a loud buzz noise, just like if you took a sound recorder into a mall and put it in the ceiling of a mall and tried to record the sound of the mall and amplified it very loud.
Lunchtime, a moment to unwind and shoot the breeze. But for someone with Asperger's, it's an unbearable 60 minutes. You don't understand the gestures or the nuances, and you can't get the jokes. It's as if you're from Mars trying to figure out the human race. So you sit there, mentally paralyzed, unable to utter a sound.
I wondered if it was some chronic social learning disability, because I felt it was a social problem all my life.
Ordinary places, everyday situations can be frightening for people with Asperger's syndrome. It's something they're born with, a brain disorder that makes it hard for them to interpret information. It's often been described as a mild form of autism, for which there is no cure. Asperger's sufferers are hypersensitive to everything around them. They take everything literally, and as a result, they have a lot of difficulty communicating and understanding other people's thoughts and feelings. So they end up socially isolated, living by themselves with few, if any, friends.
Asperger's syndrome only became widely known about 10 years ago. When Brian Henson was diagnosed in 1995, he was finally able to make some sense of his troubled life. The 52-year-old former electrician and surveyor from Brantford, Ontario, has always preferred to work by himself. He never had any close friends, even as a kid in school.
As far as trying to make friends, or even what the purpose of friendship was for and things like that, those were areas that seemed to evade me. Anything that you couldn't look up in Encyclopedia Britannica was something that I just couldn't learn.
The leading Canadian expert on Asperger's is Peter Zatmary. He's a psychiatrist at the Centre for Studies of Children at Risk at McMaster University in Hamilton, Ontario.
A lot of them really feel very lonely and they want to make friends with other people, but they really have very little clue of how to do it. They don't know what's expected of them cognitively. They don't know the rules of the game.
To people with Asperger's, simple human communications are an undecipherable code. They don't understand a raised eyebrow, a smile, or even a wave of a hand.
In other words, other people are like a blank slate to them. And that can be very confusing for them when they're trying to regulate their behavior in a social situation.
Brian Henson has spent most of his life alone. He has 5 brothers and sisters, but rarely talks to them. He never married. As a teenager, he didn't know the first thing about getting a date.
I would be asking people, what is dating? And usually I'd be teased about it. They'd look at me and say, boy, come on now, don't you know what dating is? And that's all I'd get for an answer. I wouldn't, and it just left me just as dumbfounded as before I asked the question.
What have your relationships been like as an adult?
Well, they were kind of the same way, just dead.
But Brian is anything but dead inside. He has intense feelings which terrify him because he can't control them.
I feel a lot of emotion inside all the time, almost like a form of, I don't know what you call it, disintegrative anxiety, almost like I feel like I'm gonna just fall apart sometime is what it feels like, and I feel like I'm trying to hold myself together.
How about I start, shall we? Shall we start with, so we're still on communications.
When Leonora Gregory was diagnosed with Asperger's 4 years ago, she felt as if she had been set free. She's well educated, a former ballet teacher who lives in Vancouver.
Okay. And then we can have a discussion about communications and what
Leonora was always depressed about her inability to communicate with people. The diagnosis gave her a way to understand herself. It also launched her on a whole new career in counseling people with similar problems.
The brain processing, the difference in how we perceive information, and the time it takes for us to digest that information and then regurgitate it. It's significantly different.
Leonora can't analyze situations quickly. It's as if her mind works on manual instead of automatic. She spent her life memorizing everything, from high school textbooks to how to behave in social situations. Even now, when I ask her a question, it's hard to figure out exactly what it means.
In everyone's life, things change, though. You know, I may decide, well, I was going to the store, but I'm going to go to the office instead. And when I get to the office, they say, well, you know, you were supposed to do this, but you're going to do this instead. Is sudden change particularly difficult for people with Asperger's syndrome?
Like when you asked that question just now, I was going all over the place with it. I was trying to keep track. Okay, he goes to the store, now he's told he's going to the office. Or did he make the decision he's going to the office? Because somewhere in there he was told he had errands. I'm trying to reorganize it in a way that I get it. Yeah. Is that a good example of how it works?
Leonora can finally understand certain experiences in her life that caused a lot of pain, such as the time when a simple trip to the supermarket became a nightmare.
And I walked down the aisles, up and down, looking at the shelves, and everything seemed the same. I couldn't differentiate between any of the packages, so I walked out of the store. I started to starve and I became anorexic.
Psychiatrists believe that Asperger's syndrome affects as many as 5 out of every 1,000 children. Leonora's son has Asperger's and cerebral palsy. She started this group in Vancouver so that he and other Asperger's kids could learn to play together and make friends.
It almost got my foot. Just in time. I'll wait till there's an answer.
Well, you can't, because we're doing it in a round.
Unlike kids with classic autism, Asperger's children have good verbal skills and normal intelligence.
What?
It's a dagger.
Dagger.
That's why they're so hard to identify. But if they're not diagnosed at an early age, the syndrome can have a devastating impact on their lives. Angus is a handsome 17-year-old high school student who should be having the time of his life. But he has no social life to speak of. He's extremely withdrawn, and going to school is a challenge. Not because the work is overwhelming, it's the isolation.
When you're in school, Angus, do you hang out with a lot of kids, or are you generally by yourself?
I'm usually by myself, yeah.
How does that feel?
You get used to it after a few years of being like that.
Do you feel different when you look at your classmates? Do you feel different inside?
Yes, I do.
What sorts of things happen in school that annoy you?
Angus's behavior is typical of Asperger's sufferers. Eye contact with a stranger is unbearable, and answering a simple question is a struggle.
People get into fights and stuff there sometimes, but...
Do kids ever pick on you? Because you're different?
Yeah, all the time. I just try and ignore it.
What do they say to you? What do they do?
For Angus to respond, he actually has to call up the experience from memory. And when he does that, in his mind, he's reliving the pain of that moment.
I've seen, people get Angus in trouble with teachers, and Angus will just take the blame for it and stuff, because...
Angus's only friend at school is his younger brother, Duncan.
Doesn't stick up for himself?
Yeah.
Because he can't?
That's right.
Another telltale sign of Asperger's is obsessiveness. Some children get hooked on quirky things, memorizing train schedules or weather reports. But sometimes an eccentric interest can become a gift. Angus loves to draw and spends up to 4 hours a day on his comic strips. He hopes it will lead to a career, but right now, it's his refuge.
Takes me into, like, the thing that I'm doing, like the comic book or, like, something that I'm writing, and I get lost in that world. I forget about this world, sort of.
Puts a smile on your face.
Yeah.
Gives children a good shot at overcoming their social problems, but it is still an uphill battle. Anthony Genovese is 10. He was diagnosed when he was 6. The school board in Nanaimo, BC developed a special program for him. He arrives an hour later than the other kids.
And I don't have to do any work today.
Really? How come?
Reward day, what else?
So what were your thoughts for today then?
Anthony has a classroom and a teaching assistant all to himself.
Sorry.
When you come back,
today's reward day.
Well, what did you have planned for it?
For the time being, the only way he can cope is if he feels in control.
What you have in mind to figure out? Dress it over in there?
It's my chair.
It is your chair. You are absolutely right.
Last year, he was in a regular class, and it was a disaster from day one. He felt isolated and under a lot of stress. Anthony would blow up over the slightest miscue, and that would lead to suspension. Jerry and Pat Genovese don't think kicking their son out of school is the proper response, even if he completely loses it.
Well, he became very upset over an incident in the gym, and he dealt with it the best way he knew how, by just leaving the gym. And he ran up to his own classroom. However, the door was locked. And he was trying to get in the door, and he was kicking and banging.
During that blow-up, 2 teachers tried to restrain Anthony. His parents feel they completely misread and mishandled the situation.
He was trying to snatch the key away from the teacher. Finally, they let him in. He was so upset that he grabbed a chair and he held it up over his head and said, "I'm going to hit you with this chair."
How should the teachers have dealt with that?
He wanted to go and cool off. And if he was allowed the space to do that, this wouldn't have had to have happened.
The kid can't say to everybody, "Look, I'm really stressed out here. I'm really feeling an enormous amount of anxiety. Everybody back off. Give me a little space."
Doctors at Mary insist that punishment is the worst way to deal with Asperger's kids.
Unfortunately, it's all too common a picture. And it's the result of dealing with the behavior rather than dealing with the stress that's motivating the behavior. The difficulty with suspension is that it removes the child from the one environment where he or she can receive the most benefit. I mean, we know that the treatment for these kids involves interaction with other children.
Each day at school, Anthony spends 15 minutes to an hour with other kids. It's all he can handle. The school eventually wants to reintegrate him into a normal classroom.
Finally.
But Anthony feels he's not yet up to the challenge.
Do you miss not having other kids around? Most kids would say they love being in a class with their friends.
No, well, in a way I do, but I'm very relieved that I'm just alone, smooth, and good.
If you were in a classroom with 20 kids or 25...
I've been in that, and it's really chaotic from time to time. I got in trouble with the office. It's very annoying. Hated school when I was in grade 4, but now that's gone. All that yucky garbage is dead. All this yucky trouble garbage is dead.
With school being such a struggle, Anthony needed a place where he could just have some fun. He found it in martial arts. Though it took him a bit longer than the other children, he recently earned his yellow belt.
Whatever he does in karate, he's achieved by himself, and it's allowed him to fit in. This is something that we haven't really pushed on him. It's something that he wanted to do, and he decided he was going to do it, and he's done it. And we're really proud of that.
If you had one thing to say to parents or teachers to make the lives of kids with Asperger's easier, what would it be?
The diversity that these children demonstrate, the differences that these children demonstrate, need to be understood. That we need to accommodate them. They don't necessarily need to change for our benefit.
40 years on from Anthony, Brian Henson is looking at Asperger's through the other end of life's telescope. 3 years ago, he hit rock bottom. He was in deep despair about living out the rest of his life, never having experienced a relationship.
Oh, someday when you least expect it, she'll show up when you're not looking for her and all that. That's what I kept hearing. But then that carried on all during my 20s, during my 30s, and then when I got to my mid-40s, that's when I came down with this depression, because I felt like my life was just going to go away, as though this whole thing I'd been waiting for nearly 30 years, just no hint of it.
Since the diagnosis, his situation has improved. For the first time, Brian has been able to understand a lot of what has gone wrong. And he recently took a bold step. He met a woman and finally figured out what dating is all about.
Do you think you'll ever get married?
Well, it's, I say possibility. I'm not one, I say, that counts my chickens before they hatch, but I always keep my fingers crossed, say, put it that way.